It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day in May where the air hung heavy with the promise of summer, but the light itself felt thin, brittle. I was on patrol, Unit 703, cruising the quiet, tree-lined streets of Cedar Creek. This wasn't the usual beat where calls came in about domestics gone sideways or late-night break-ins. Cedar Creek was where the lawns were meticulously manicured, the mailboxes gleamed, and the biggest scandal was usually a rogue sprinkler head. It was the kind of place where people moved for peace of mind, for the kind of silence that usually only comes after a full night's sleep. But that day, the silence felt wrong. It hummed with an invisible tension, a prelude to something jarring. The call came in routine enough. Welfare check, 1422 Elmwood Drive. Anonymous caller reports no visible activity. Concerned about an elderly resident. Simple. Elderly residents sometimes went on trips, sometimes just kept to themselves. But an anonymous call, that always pricked something. It meant someone saw something, or didn't see something, that bothered them enough to call, but not enough to put their name on it. It smelled of unease, of a gut feeling that had simmered too long. I keyed the mic. 703 copy, en route to Elmwood. As I pulled up to 1422 Elmwood, the house itself was a portrait of suburban tranquility. 2 stories, well-kept beige siding, a blooming rosebush by the porch. No overgrown lawn, no stacked newspapers screaming absentee. The curtains were drawn, which wasn't unusual. But the silence, that heavy, thick silence, was unnerving. Most homes in Cedar Creek had some sign of life. A dog barking, a sprinkler hissing, faint music, kids playing down the street. This house was a tomb. I walked up the flagstone path, the perfectly edged pavers feeling unnaturally solid under my boots. I knocked on the front door, twice. Long, deliberate knocks. No answer. I tried the doorbell. A polite chime echoed into the emptiness. Still nothing. I peered through a gap in the curtains on a front window, cupping my hands. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light, but the room beyond was still. Furniture draped in white sheets as if awaiting a return that might never come. I circled the house, checking windows, trying doorknobs. Every window was latched tight. Every door secured. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass. The back garden was as pristine as the front. A small patio set neatly arranged, a grill covered. It was almost too perfect, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. That's when I noticed it. Not something missing, but something subtly wrong. A small, almost imperceptible detail that snagged at my peripheral vision. Behind a dense rhododendron bush, tucked away from the main garden path, there was a small, rusty grate set into the ground. It looked like a vent, maybe for a basement or crawl space. It was partially covered by creeping ivy, but not completely. And through the grime and rust I thought I saw a shimmer, a faint, almost imperceptible glint of something. My gut clenched. Elderly resident welfare check, right? Nothing about this suggested an elderly resident. This felt different. I crouched down, pulling away the ivy. The grate was old, with thick bars secured by heavy rusted bolts. It wasn't just a vent. It was a secure cover, probably for a window well leading to a basement. The shimmer I'd seen, it was faint, like moonlight on something reflective, but the sun was high. I pressed my face closer to the grate, blocking out the light. The air, coming up from below, was cool, damp, and carried a faint metallic scent. And then I heard it. So soft, so fleeting, I almost dismissed it as the wind. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. A whimper. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an elderly resident on vacation. This wasn't just an empty house. My hand flew to my radio. 703 to dispatch. I'm at 1422 Elmwood. Welfare check is escalating. I believe there might be a person, possibly a child, in the basement. Requesting immediate backup and fire department for possible forced entry. Expedite. The silence that followed felt deafening, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the frantic beat of my own heart. The perfect street. The perfect house was hiding a perfect horror. I stayed low, my eyes glued to that rusty grate, listening, straining to hear it again. The whimper. The faint, undeniable sound of a cry trapped in the dark. Every fiber of my training screamed at me to act, to break in, but procedure demanded backup, demanded a controlled entry. And in that agonizing moment, I realized the full weight of the chilling secret this meticulously kept suburban home was trying to bury. Backup arrived within minutes, a blur of flashing lights and hushed urgency. Sergeant Miller, a man whose face was etched with every dark secret this city held, took point. Fire department was right behind him, their heavy gear a stark contrast to the quiet suburban street. I quickly briefed them on the grate, the strange silence and that almost phantom whimper. Miller's gaze, usually unreadable, sharpened on the tiny grate, a flicker of grim recognition in his eyes. This wasn't his first rodeo with a house that kept its secrets buried. He gave the nod to fire. Let's open it up gently. The firefighters, efficient and silent, began to work on the rusted bolts. Each squeak of the wrench, each groan of metal, seemed amplified in the unnatural quiet. My stomach was a knot of dread and anticipation. That whimper. Was it real? Or just my mind playing tricks in the suffocating tension? The grate finally came loose with a final, metallic clang that seemed to echo down into the earth. A cool, stale breath wafted up, carrying that faint metallic scent I'd noticed before, now mixed with something else. Something musty, cloying, like old dampness, and something organic. Firefighters shone powerful lights down into the blackness. The basement was exactly as I'd pictured. A dark, unfinished space. Concrete walls, a few dusty boxes, and at the far end, a single flickering bare bulb. And then we saw it. Not immediately, not clearly. It was a small cot, tucked into a corner, draped with a threadbare blanket. And on the cot, a tiny curled form. Too still. Oh God, Miller muttered, his voice unusually strained. We didn't wait. The fire department cut through the flimsy basement, Diabber with a single, practiced swing. The stale air hit us, colder now, denser. I was the first one down the creaking wooden stairs, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The form on the cot was indeed a child, a girl. Small. Too small. Her skin was ashen, almost translucent, and her eyes, when they slowly fluttered open, were wide, vacant, and held a depth of fear that was horrifying to behold. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound, just that silent, terrifying stare. She looked like a ghost, a tiny, forgotten wraith in the dark. Paramedics moved in immediately, their voices calm, professional, but their faces betrayed their shock. They worked quickly, assessing her vitals, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. She was malnourished, severely so, and her body was riddled with old scars, some faded, some recent. Signs of neglect, of prolonged confinement. My mind reeled. Who would do this? And in a house like this, on a street like this? It was an insult to common decency, a perversion of the very idea of home. As the paramedics carefully carried her up the stairs, a tremor went through me. That was the most agonizing part of the job, seeing innocence utterly shattered, knowing someone had systematically, cruelly done this. While the girl was rushed to the hospital, Miller and I began our methodical sweep of the basement. The space was barren, save for the cot, a rusted bucket, and a few tattered children's drawings taped to the cold concrete wall. Crude, childlike drawings of stick figures, a sun with a frowning face, a single, solitary flower. My heart ached looking at them. This wasn't just a basement. It was a prison, a world reduced to 4 concrete walls and a single lonely bulb. The air was thick with the residue of prolonged despair. On the floor, near the cot, I found a small, worn teddy bear, its fur matted, one eye missing. It was clutched tightly in a tiny, hand-drawn outline of a child's hand on a piece of paper. It felt like a cry for help frozen in time. Upstairs, the house maintained its pristine, untouched facade. No dust, no disarray, no signs of life. The kitchen was spotless, the living room furniture covered. It was as if no one lived here, Or if they did, they moved with an eerie, surgical precision. There were no family photos on the walls, no personal touches that spoke of a home, only a meticulously maintained shell. This was the most chilling detail. This wasn't a squat or a sudden desperate act. This was planned. This was deliberate. This was a secret kept hidden for a very, very long time. And the question clawed at me: who lived in this house? Who was responsible for the ghost in the basement? And how could they have kept this horror hidden for so long on a street where everyone knew everyone else's business? The first break came not from forensics, but from the land registry. The house at 1422 Elmwood Drive was owned by a couple, a Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, John and Martha Peterson. They were listed as the only occupants, active residents for the past 8 years. A quick check of their social media painted a picture of idyllic suburban life, smiling photos at community events, pictures of garden parties, Martha's prize-winning roses. No kids, no grandkids visible anywhere. Their profiles were perfectly curated, almost aggressively normal. My gut twisted. This perfection was a lie, a carefully constructed facade designed to hide the monstrous truth we'd just unearthed. Sergeant Miller pulled their files. John Peterson, 58, retired accountant. Martha Peterson, 55, former elementary school teacher. Both had clean records, no history of violence, no mental health flags. They were, on paper, the quintessential respectable citizens of Cedar Creek. This made the reality of what we'd found in their basement even more sickening. How do you reconcile the cheerful community volunteer with the architect of such cruelty? The disjunction was jarring, almost unbelievable. We put out an APB, a BOLO, be on the lookout for the Petersons' vehicle. They hadn't been home when I arrived, and their car was gone. Likely gone the moment they realized their carefully constructed silence had been breached. While we waited for the APB to yield results, I went back to the basement, this time with a full forensics team. They swarmed the space, meticulously bagging evidence. What they found, though grim, was mostly consistent with long-term confinement. Empty, dried-up food containers, cheap plastic utensils, a bucket filled with human waste, a few children's books, dog-eared and stained. No toys, no comfort items beyond that single matted teddy bear. The drawings on the wall were carefully removed. They depicted a solitary stick figure, often with a frowning face, sometimes a single teardrop. But one drawing, crudely sketched with a broken crayon, stood out. It was a family portrait. Two tall stick figures, presumably the Petersons, with stern, unsmiling faces. And between them, much smaller, a tiny stick figure, its hands outstretched, almost pleading. And above it, in shaky, childish letters, Lila, Lila, her name. The girl at the hospital was still unresponsive, in a critical but stable condition. She hadn't spoken a word. The doctors were doing everything they could, but her body was ravaged by neglect, and her mind was a blank slate of trauma. The drawing felt like a scream, a desperate plea for recognition from a child the world had forgotten. We cross-referenced Lila with the Petersons. No children listed on their birth records, no adoptions, 0. It was like she didn't exist, in any official capacity. The ghost in the system. The more we dug, the more the Petersons' lives seemed like a carefully constructed illusion. Neighbors described them as private but friendly. Always kept to themselves but would wave hello, was the common refrain. No one ever saw children coming or going. No deliveries for baby supplies, no child's toys in the yard. It was as if Lila had materialized out of thin air, a horrifying secret kept perfectly contained within the walls of that quiet, beige house. The sheer audacity of it, the cold calculation required to maintain such a charade for years, was chilling. How did they feed her without anyone noticing? How did they keep her quiet? The questions piled up, each more disturbing than the last. This wasn't just neglect. This was extreme, prolonged psychological torment and physical abuse. And they had done it while living lives of impeccable suburban normalcy, attending bake sales and chatting over fences. The perfect facade was what made them so dangerous, so utterly undetectable. The thought made my skin crawl. The APB for the Petersons turned up nothing for hours. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace beyond the horror in their basement. But you can't erase years of existence. Miller had put a team on their financial records, their phone activity, anything that could give us a lead. And then, at 2 a.m., the call came in. Not from a patrol car spotting their vehicle, but from a county outside ours. A small rural hospital reported a man matching John Peterson's description, admitted for a severe panic attack. He was alone. I drove out immediately, the darkness of the highway mirroring the grimness in my stomach. John Peterson was in a private room hooked up to monitors, pale and trembling. A doctor was trying to calm him. "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice deliberately calm. "I'm Officer Carter. We need to talk about what we found at your house." His eyes, wide and terrified, darted to mine. His lips moved, but no sound came out. It was raw fear, a primal terror. That confirmed everything. This wasn't a man reacting to a misunderstanding. This was a man whose carefully constructed world had just imploded. I began to question him gently, methodically, but he was barely coherent. He just kept repeating, "She's not mine, she's not mine. Martha did it." His words were fragmented, laced with a desperate need to shift blame. He spoke of the promise of Martha's secret, of her dream. It was clear he was breaking. He then mumbled something about the other one. That caught my attention. "The other one, Mr. Peterson? What are you talking about?" His eyes darted to the corner of the room as if seeing something I couldn't. "The first one, she couldn't keep her, so she came here." A chill went down my spine. The first one? This wasn't just about Lila, this was a pattern. This was something far darker. Just as Peterson seemed on the verge of revealing more, a nurse rushed in. "Officer, his wife, Martha Peterson, just found her. She's in critical condition." My heart sank. Martha, the mastermind, the architect of this nightmare. Now she was unreachable. It felt like a deliberate act to silence her, to prevent us from getting the full story. Was it a suicide attempt, or something more sinister tied to her unraveling mind? The timing was too perfect, too convenient. This whole case was turning into a psychological labyrinth. Back at the station, Miller and I reviewed the fragmented details. The first one, Martha's secret, her dream. It pointed to a hidden history, a dark past that predated Lila. We started digging into Martha Peterson's background, her family, her childhood. What we uncovered was a pattern of obsessive behavior, a history of miscarriages, and a deep-seated, almost pathological desire for a child. There were also whispers from old neighbors in another state about a child that disappeared years ago, a child Martha had been fixated on. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a terrifying mosaic of a woman driven to extreme measures by a twisted form of maternal longing. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Lila was beginning to show faint signs of life. Her eyes, though still distant, occasionally followed the nurses. She had drawn another picture, a small stick figure, this time with a smile, holding hands with a larger stick figure that looked vaguely like a kind-faced nurse. The contrast to the earlier drawings was stark, a glimmer of hope in a very dark place, but her silence persisted. She wouldn't speak. She was a ghost who had finally been seen, but whose voice was still locked away by years of darkness. And, until she spoke or Martha could, the full horrifying truth of what happened in that quiet house would remain tantalizingly out of reach. The facade had crumbled, but the true depths of the horror beneath were only just beginning to reveal themselves. Days bled into a week. Lila slowly, painstakingly began to recover physically, but her silence remained unbroken. The doctors confirmed severe psychological trauma. She would flinch at sudden movements, cower from loud noises. John Peterson, after his recovery, remained uncooperative, his fragmented ramblings circling Martha and the promise, never directly acknowledging Lila's confinement. He seemed more a victim of Martha's twisted will than an active participant, though his complicity was undeniable. Martha Peterson remained in a coma, her secrets locked behind a veil of unconsciousness. It felt like hitting a wall. We had the victim, we had the perpetrators, but the why and the how for so long remained maddeningly elusive. I found myself spending more time at the hospital, not just for updates, but drawn by some unseen force. To Lila's room. She was a tiny, fragile beacon of resilience. One afternoon, I brought her a small, new teddy bear, one with both eyes firmly attached. She looked at it, then at me, her gaze lingering. And then she did something unexpected. She reached out a tiny hand, took the bear, and clutched it. Her eyes, for the first time, held a spark of something beyond fear, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even trust. It was a fragile connection, built on quiet, patient presence. Later that day, a child psychologist, Dr. Aris, who had been working with Lila, called me into the hallway. "Officer Carter," she said, her voice hushed with urgency. "Lila just drew something for me, and she spoke a word." My heart leaped. "What did she say?" Dr. Aris held up a new drawing. It was a simple, yet chilling depiction. A stick figure, much larger than Lila, stood over a smaller stick figure. Above the larger figure, in shaky, almost indecipherable letters, was written M. And then, in a very tiny bubble above the smaller figure, Mommy. But it wasn't a happy drawing. The larger figure was holding a stick and the smaller figure was crying. She said, "Mommy, no." Dr. Aris whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of sadness and horror. And then she drew this. "We think M is Martha." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. It wasn't Mommy in the loving sense. It was Mommy as the tormentor, the keeper. Lila's first word, spoken in the outside world, was a cry of protest, a memory of pain. This wasn't about a missing child. This was about a child stolen from another life. A child Martha had forcibly kept, perhaps to replace the ones she couldn't have, or to fulfill a twisted fantasy of motherhood. The first one, she couldn't keep her. John Peterson's fragmented words echoed in my mind. It suddenly became clear. Martha hadn't just kept Lila. She had taken her. We revisited Martha Peterson's past with renewed urgency, specifically focusing on any incidents involving missing children in her previous towns of residence. It took digging deep into old missing persons reports, cold cases that had gone nowhere. And then we found it. A missing child report from a small town in Arizona 8 years ago. A girl 5 years old vanished from her backyard. Her name was Lila. The age matched. The timeline matched. Her biological parents, heartbroken and desperate, had never given up hope. Martha Peterson had lived in that town for a brief, unsettling period before moving to Cedar Creek. It wasn't just neglect. It was abduction, a calculated long-term crime of obsession. The final confrontation, though not with Martha directly, she remained in a coma, was with John Peterson, armed with this crushing new evidence. I laid out the facts: the Arizona missing persons report, Lila's drawing, her first word. He broke completely, sobbing, confirming everything. Martha had seen Lila in Arizona, become fixated and kidnapped her, bringing her to Cedar Creek, burying her existence in the perfect, quiet basement. John, weakened by Martha's obsessive personality and a deep-seated fear of her, had become complicit, a silent enabler in this horrifying charade. He confessed to feeding Lila, to sometimes trying to comfort her when Martha wasn't around, but never daring to defy his wife's will. Lila, the silent child, had finally found her voice through the echoes of her past, through a drawing and through the fractured confession of a broken man. The case of the unseen child was closed, but the scars, both physical and psychological, would linger. Lila was reunited with her true family, a reunion filled with tears of sorrow for lost years and overwhelming joy for a miracle found. And I, Officer Ben Carter, walked away from that case with a profound, chilling understanding of the darkness that can hide behind the most pristine facades and the incredible, fragile resilience of a child's spirit, even after years in the dark. The silence of Cedar Creek would never sound the same to me again.